So, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a very special guest. I have David Shoemaker on, who actually, I believe it was your book, I think was the first book I read on Thelema in general, which was Living Thelema. Then later on, I picked up The
Wonderful.
Winds of Wisdom, which is a great book as well, Visions from the 30 Enochian Aethys, which was a really nice, refreshing account of sort of a modern take or a modern experimentation with the Enochian system. And so I figured I would have you on today. And I know there's a lot more you do other than write books too. So maybe I'll pass the ball over to you and you can tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, Brian.
Hmm.
It's a pleasure. Um, Brief introduction. So I am the writer, the author of Living Thelema and Winds of Wisdom. I've edited some other texts, including most recently the Llewellyn's complete book of ceremonial magic, which I co-edited with Lon Duquette.
Hmm.
Fairly massive beast of an editing project, but a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a psychologist, clinical psychologist in private practice here in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina after about a quarter century practicing in California. I'm the prolocutor and chancellor of the Temple of the Silver Star, which is a ceremonial magical order based on the cipher manuscripts of the Golden Dawn and also fully incorporating Thelema into all its degree structure and instruction, and continuing to do the Living Thelema podcast on a regular basis as I feel like I have content to share.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, your book was the first introduction to Thelema, and yeah, definitely your podcast has a lot of golden nuggets in the podcast. And I noticed there's been some recent ones that have
Mm-hmm.
about Kabbalah and psychology that I haven't checked out yet, so definitely have to go check those out later. But I'm curious, just in general, how you got interested or sort of dove into esotericism and the Western mystery tradition.
Sure. Yeah, I emerged from college sort of a devout atheist and got into graduate school. Very interested in Jung, though, and I always say Jung was my gateway drug, but I got really interested in Jung's work, and this made me realize that I was actually seeking a spiritual path. I just hadn't termed it that or felt it that way consciously. Because as I was exploring Jung, it was just the sort of the mystery of it was calling to me the symbols and the work with the unconscious and doing an intentional living an intentional path of dialogue with those hidden aspects of self uh, was really speaking to me. So I somehow found Israel Regardie's book, The Middle Pillar. I think I was exploring some Wicca materials from Llewellyn, and I accidentally found Regardie's Middle Pillar. And of course, in there, he talks about Kabbalistic psychology. He talks about the Golden Dawn. He talks about the overlap of Kabbalistic psychology and Jungian studies. And importantly, he talks about Crowley's work. And so that was the gateway to find Crowley, and who I knew of by reputation, but there's a lot of crap out there. So I really had no idea until I started reading Crowley in the original that he was as brilliant as he was, and of course that sealed the deal in terms of what my life's work was going to be about. I remember a discrete moment standing, holding the middle pillar, and reading about all this stuff, and thinking, "This is what I am going to do the rest of my life." And sure enough, the sort of bridging of psychology and magic and instruction in the same is what I've been doing.
Okay. I'm curious too. So you picked up Regardie's book, and it immediately caught your interest, and you probably started doing practices on your own, I would imagine. Did you sort of experiment a little bit with the rituals you came across, like the middle
Hmm.
pillar and other things
Hmm.
like that? And then from there, did you joined an order, or you decided to sort of research if there's any sort of groups that you could get into contact with?
I had about 6 months ish of solitary practice of
Hmm.
the basics, pentagram ritual the middle pillar and such. But late 1993, I simultaneously was initiated into OTO and
Hmm.
also initiated into the tradition that has, for me, morphed into Temple of the Silver Star,
Hmm.
and also started the AA student phase. So it was a big year, and but I dove in pretty quickly, right at the beginning, once I knew I wanted to do it, because I the structure of magical orders appealed to me.
Hmm. Okay, cool. I'm curious, I mean, you've been in this working in this area for quite a long time. How would you describe how your practice, how has it developed over time? And currently, do you have like a daily regimen or things, maybe like regular practices that you do? Might not be
Sure.
daily, but just on a,
Yeah.
maybe a regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, largely in the time between 93 and 2004 ish, um, I would say my daily practice was evolving more or less in line with my initiatory work.
Hmm.
So depending on the degree or grade I was at in one order or another, I was doing the corresponding work. So that had a major influence on how my day-to-day work was going then. After my KNC experience and the resulting work that grew out of that with the Aethers and such, a lot of it since then has been much more kind of following my nose about where I'm being guided in terms of the daily work I need to be doing. So daily regimen of the basic hygienic rituals has never gone away. Pentagram, hexagram rituals,
Hmm.
some version of the middle pillar, meditation of extended dharana, which is, I suppose, I increasingly incorporated more of a Buddhist approach to my meditation than I did before.
Hmm.
But then occasional practices when I want to do a targeted magical working of some kind, it's very likely to be using the Kabbalistic hierarchies or
Hmm.
Enochian tablets, or for, as with Winds of Wisdom, for the sort of inward journey, the 30 Aethers.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, the your book, The Winds of Wisdom, was really, really good. And I got into Enochian probably maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. I took a
Hmm.
Zoom course with Lon Milo Duquette. I'm over here all the
Hmm.
way in Korea, so I don't have much, physical contact or the
Sure,
ability
sure.
to attend physical classes or anything like that. But that sort of got me into it, and I was sort of looking around for like modern accounts of, scrying through the Aethers, and there wasn't much out there. But I did come across your book, which was great, and I noticed that you take a very um, I would say very slow and gradual and perhaps healthy approach to scrying the Aethers, right? And
Mm.
so I'm curious, like how, if there are people who are interested in getting into Enochian, how would you, or what kind of advice would you give them? And maybe you can share a little bit about your own personal approach that you took.
Sure, yeah. Well, let me take the first part first. I think the most useful way, and maybe this is my bias from having done it this way, but I think
Hmm.
one of the best ways to get the foundational training in the Enochian system is to go through an outer order like Temple of the Silver Star that incorporates the elemental work of with the Enochian tablets, culminating in second order instruction in the more advanced techniques like Aether scrying and opening up specific parts of the elemental tablets. That for me was just like putting all the building blocks together gradually and systematically in a way that I don't think I would have personally benefited as much if I had done that. So when I approached the Aether scrying, um, this was as very, very consciously as a path of inward initiation that I didn't exactly know where it was going to lead. Of course, how could we know? But um, I knew I wanted to do it sequentially. I wanted to sort of replicate that aspect of Crowley's approach to the Aethers, as in Vision in the Voice.
Hmm.
And what I found that was pretty fascinating was that uh, I could have every intention of doing, a new Aether every day, but I
Mhm.
would get to certain places and just stop, not intentionally, and not because of any obvious sort of impediment, but
Mhm.
I would just stop, and then a few weeks or sometimes even months later, excuse me, sometimes even months later, I'd come back to do the next one, and each vision tended to have some recommendations for here's what you need to work on in between, so some homework.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't always realize what the homework was until I got to the next one. And then it
Right.
would become obvious that I couldn't have moved forward until I incorporated some of the lessons from the previous Aethers. So the work through the 30 Aethers spanned several years and really did uh, involve my own personal magical and mystical progress. It's sort of in an inward initiatory sense as much as anything else. So that was the big sort of confirmatory surprise for me in terms of the system, that if you do this work with intention and seriousness, and you pay attention to what you're getting, it can be really transformative. In my life, it led me to the next phases of where my entire life needed to go.
Mhm. That's interesting. It's very much so been my experience as well with Scrying the Aethers. Initially, I think the
Great.
first few I went through pretty quickly, and then pretty much every other Aether after it's been a month, 2 months, even 3 months in
Hmm.
between each one. And it's not like I'm putting it off or it's some sort of intentional like I'm going to scry the 22nd Aether in 9 months or anything like that. It's not some scheduled thing, but it just feels
Right.
natural, sort of, as you mentioned, sort of integrating the visions and the experiences and the lessons of that previous Aether that I scribed. So pretty interesting. Um, yeah, I notice a lot in a lot of your writing, you focus a lot on the psychological aspects of the path, and that's something I
Yeah.
personally resonate a lot with. But I don't know, I don't know how much you're online, but there's always that sort of debate between the spirit model and the psychological model, and is there, do you feel like there's a danger of being overly focused maybe on one or the other, like being too psychological and everything's in the mind, or on the
Yeah.
other hand, being sort of negating the psychological model
Mhm.
altogether and being very much so it's all about the spirits? And what's your sort of take on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the danger is being reductionistic from any single viewpoint.
Hmm. Hmm.
And look, there are psychological aspects to everything, there are philosophical aspects to everything, there are spiritual aspects to everything. So if we try to describe something from one of those angles as part of describing it, not as a totality of describing it, there's always a danger that somebody's going to look at that and say, "See, you're reducing it all to X." And that's frankly something that has always kind of driven me crazy in terms of you know I can have an essay on the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, a deeply mystical and powerful experience that I could never describe away with merely psychological terms. And in the next chapter, I happen to be talking about Kabbalistic psychology, and so everyone goes, "Oh, you're just reducing it all to psychology," but ignoring the explicitly spiritual focus of the chapter right next to it.
Hmm.
So I think it is very important that we understand these lenses that we look through to describe anything in life, and recognize that they're valid on their own plane, but they don't have to take over the whole picture. Um,
Right, right. That's a very good point. Um, yeah, I think not confusing the planes is kind of a big thing, and I think that
yeah,
people sort of had natural tendencies to lean one way or another when explaining something or when integrating experience. And so I think it's sort of I don't know, I think it's interesting to see people sort of go into this sort of extreme viewpoint or extreme camps where instead of sort of seeing the value in the different paradigms and different ways of experiencing and seeing things, being a little bit more fluid with things rather than um,
yeah,
dogmatic, I guess you would say, right?
right,
So,
right, and yeah,
mhm.
and staying open to other ways of looking at your experience and other ways of describing it, just for the sake of diversity of thought, and exercising the muscles of different ways of thinking about what's going on.
Definitely. One thing that drew me to Crowley and Thelema in general and was actually the motto of the AA, which was the method of science and the aim of religion, which was on the equinox, right? And I'm just curious, sort of your take. Like, do you think that motto, that was perhaps 100 years ago or over 100 years ago, right? Do you think that motto finds a home in the AA today? And are there sort of concrete ways that you would like to import a scientific spirit into the AA? Just food for thought is like, I'm looking around at like virtual reality and just sort of, just how the modern world is developing. Do you see any sort of ways you would like to see the AA develop in those lines?
Well, I think there's two important points I'd like to make on that. One is that Crowley's vision of the scientific aspects of AA, I think, are defined somewhat by his understanding of behavioral science at the time. And so in terms of the scientific illuminist approach of looking inward to our experience and letting empirical observation of our experience shape our beliefs about what is true for us, so that is an empirical model. It's just a subjective it's not a hard science approach. So that has never stopped, and over the course of the last century, the AA has continued to evolve via the continued work of its adepts in leaving diaries behind that help teach followers what they did that worked and what didn't work. And so that aspect of the scientific approach has always been there, and that makes the AA, as well as the Temple of the Silver Star, which is a separate organization, I should emphasize. There's confusion on that. It makes us a living, these are living orders where it's not calcified in terms of something written 100 years ago. It's a living experience that is added to by everyone doing it. Now, to the second part of your question, I think there's a lot of interesting technology out there that I hope increasingly we can see, finding ways to integrate into magical practice. I'll give you one example that I've encountered personally and used is the Muse headset that tracks, I think a sort of averaged out set of brain activity, brain signals. And I was skeptical about, what is this measuring? Is it going to be sensitive to anything resembling my inner experience? But what I found was, and for people who don't know, it's just a simple headband that is Bluetooth connected to your phone, and it will detect the overall activity of the brain and record that. And it purports to be sensitive to, the slowing down of brain activity that would correspond with a deeper meditative state. And also, if you get distracted or you're having all kinds of thoughts float through, then supposedly it's going to measure that. So I thought, well, I've been meditating for more than a quarter century. Let me try this and see how it actually maps what I'm experiencing. And what I found was that, sure enough, when my subjective experience was I'm having all these distracting thoughts, it picked up on that. And when my subjective experience was in that sort of still place where you just have that awareness that you're there, you're really deeply into the meditation, it noticed that too. And this was sensitive at the level of, within a second or two of my inner state changing, it would change in terms of what it was reading. So, because there's audio feedback, you can tell what it's picking up. Anyway, I don't want to be too long-winded about this, but it's just an example of a tool that is out there that I could see being pretty useful for a beginning meditator to even start to be able to be sensitive to how much brain activity was going on. You know?
Right. Sort of seeing objectively, like tracking your progress and seeing what
Right. Hmm.
brainwave states you go through and logging it and things along those lines. Definitely.
Yeah, and the app on the phone actually will um, track what percentage of the session you were in a
Mhm.
deep state of meditation. So
Mhm.
you've got a pretty objective measure there of what we previously would have had to measure subjectively in terms of breaks of meditation,
Mhm.
which you can read about in Crowley's writing, noticing when our thought went to what's for lunch instead of the red triangle I'm supposed to be focusing on.
Right.
So you'd have to count those breaks in your head, but this sort of gives you a graphic and numerical measure of that.
That's really awesome. A previous guest of mine, he's a visionary artist, and he's
Hmm.
recently been messing around with VR, and he posted a video on his YouTube channel doing the LBRP. And I thought that was really cool because, the first time I read it about it in a book, I mean, it made sense to a degree, and you can sort of imagine or guess what it would look like, and you sort of I view it sort of as training your psychic muscles over time, right? Your
Sure.
visualization, and I think that's very important to actually do that. But I feel like if I had access to that video, because it was so vivid and it was so concrete on what the steps are, what it physically looks like, what the the pentagrams, how they're blazing, and what have you. Do you see a place for that in the future, like these, using these sorts of technologies um, to even for teaching purposes as well, not only for perhaps like you mentioned tracking progress or for personal reflection, but do you see any value um, with these kind of technologies for teaching?
Sure. I think there's several ways this can be useful. I mean, for one thing, inspires us is useful.
Yeah.
So if having a depiction of these visions is inspiring, then great.
Hmm.
That's all it has to do.
Hmm.
But as long as someone's visions or artistic representation of them or whatever is not presented as this is what you should experience,
Mm-hmm.
but more like here's what I experienced and let it be suggestive for you. I think that's where I would maybe draw the line of caution there. I
Hmm.
mean, we give ritual instruction all the time, saying now draw this pentagram and visualize it in this color and so on.
Hmm.
But we're trying not to overly define beyond that what a person's experience would be. So I don't know if I'm exactly addressing your question, but I think that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, it makes sense. I also see like a danger being that sort of relying on technology. I think technology can be used as a tool, as we're kind of talking about here, but I can
Hmm.
see how it can be, I mean, it could sort of rob you of your own perhaps experience or visualization abilities
Yeah,
when you rely on it too much, right? And so I think
right.
the challenge maybe of the future is using these things as tools rather than
Hmm.
becoming, especially in this area as well. I mean, look how technology's done so many good things, but you walk around and people are, it's the phone is using them rather than them using the phone, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And if I had trained myself to visualize via some sort of VR app,
Hmm.
I'm not dissing anybody's work here, but I know
Hmm.
if I had done that,
Hmm.
then my powers of visualization would have been substantially guided by someone else's vision of what was supposed to be seen.
Mm. Okay.
And
Hmm.
so I think it is harder to build our own unique muscles of inner perception if we are not doing the slogging work of training that from scratch, at least at some of the time. You know.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Um, as far as the AA and the Temple of the Silver Star, one thing that
Hmm.
I really like about what you guys are doing recently, you guys are putting out these YouTube video courses, which I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying. And as I mentioned, I'm over in South Korea, and I can't really attend anything physically since most of the events or what have you would be in the States.
Hmm.
And so I've been going through the new astrological magic course and
Hmm.
other previous courses on the Kabbalah and paths and what have you. And so do you think that do you think the future of teaching, like previously the Equinox and all of these writings and great books coming out, do you see the future evolving with the AA or perhaps the Temple of the Silver Star into more of a like a digital format, or how do you see that evolving with like video courses and
Yeah.
YouTube and
Yeah.
the tools at our disposal? What do you think about that?
Well, right around 2013 or so, Temple of the Silver Star started incorporating video training in its academic track teaching. So not the initiatory experience, but just the sort of teacher-student, work that would otherwise have been done one-on-one in a room somewhere, or possibly in a group classroom with a few other students. So we started incorporating video back then. The YouTube channel is more recent. Obviously, I've been doing instructional work with Living Thelema since 2010, so that's been going on. But what I think the pandemic has actually pushed us into, unwittingly but happily at this point, is seeing how much material we can have sort of constantly available to people for this sort of distance training. But really, we're still simulating the one-to-one instruction or classroom experience. One thing we'll never do is, okay, watch this video for your initiation. Our initiatory work in Temple of Silver Star and certainly in AA is all in person, and on my watch always will be, because there's just no replacement for that I see in the foreseeable future.
Okay, good point. But I do definitely see a lot of value in putting up these video courses and sort of doing a service to the community at large, right? Because as I was mentioning, I did interview Matthew before, and one cool thing is like a lot of the videos, whether it's made that way or not, they clear up a lot of misconceptions on certain things, especially ritual and other things along those lines. So I think it's a really great thing that's going on there. And as I mentioned, I did apply for Temple of the Silver Star, I think 2 times, but it seems pretty popular because it's I got an email recently, perhaps in summer. So I'm gonna keep trying. If you really want something, you continue to try, right? But I think also the pandemic too, as you mentioned with the pandemic, I'm sure there's a lot of demand for something like an academic track and learning virtually and online, especially right now. So
exactly. And we've just had a backlog of
I'm curious,
people
are there any new areas of esotericism or magic in general that you've been exploring?
Well, at this point in my magical career, basically my constant intention is to stay tuned in to the expression of my true will and how it's unfolding in my life. So that evolves with the projects in front of me, and I have to say that my overriding focus right now is on doing my best to enrich and expand and strengthen the systems of initiation that I'm responsible for. And so much of my interest lies in how to do that, and how to get constantly better at administering these systems. And sometimes that's taking mystical or magical insights from, say, the Aether Scryings and integrating those into the Temple of the Silver Star, as has happened. A lot of that Enochian work that has found its place as parts of the initiatory experience. And some of it is trying to get better at training people. Some of it is the sort of the great work of the really mundane aspects of administration, but that actually shore up the structure that allows these organizations to exist. And so it's stuff that might not look magical in a conventional sense, but that's my sense of what I'm here to do and of course writing projects and such. So it's really, for me at this phase, a lot about the way that magic has gotten me to a place where I can be myself doing these things as effectively as possible.
Okay, great. Speaking of Enochian, I recall in
Mhm.
your book you recommend scrying the second Aether, or sorry, not scrying, but using the second call.
Calling, yeah.
Yeah, prior to, is that something that that you found on experimentation, or is that sort of like a teaching you got handed down? Because I often do in certain ritual work. Sometimes I'll use the first and second call, or sometimes even just the second call, just through my own experimentation. And I
Hmm.
found it to be quite an amplifier in pretty much anything that I
Yeah.
do after that. So I'm just curious on how you came upon that, or was it something that was sort of like passed down, or yeah.
Well, it is something we teach,
Hmm.
but we wouldn't be teaching it if it didn't match my experience of
Yeah.
it working.
Right, right.
There's that living order thing, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I've just found that that the second call, not the second Aether, tends to kind of flip on the full receptivity of the person doing the scrying. So do that right before you want to really absorb whatever comes next.
Hmm. Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, for me, sometimes I do the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram, and
Hmm.
I kind of experimented with using the first call prior to doing that, and then the second, and both. And definitely when I use the second, it sort of amplifies up whatever energy that it sort of gives it an extra boost, I feel like, or a charge. And so yeah, so I thought that was interesting when I saw that in the back of your book. And
Hmm.
so you mentioned, like, you also mentioned that, are there any other books that you're working on, or any other projects that you are currently working on? Because personally, as I mentioned, your writing has been really helpful and useful, and I feel like it really clears up a lot of concepts. And so curious if there are any other books you're working on these days, or any,
Yeah,
things in the works. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, well, again, the most recent thing, if people haven't seen the complete book of ceremonial magic from Llewellyn, I think that book is designed, that came out in February of last year.
Hmm.
That book is designed to be uh, an overview of many different traditions within the ceremonial magic um, range.
Hmm.
So, for example, somebody who's very familiar with Golden Dawn work, but not with Crowley
Hmm.
or not with alchemy or whatever, could get that book and still, learn a lot, because we've got each chapter written by real experts of that area. But in
Hmm.
terms of future projects, well, there's been a lot of Living Thelema podcasts episodes that came out, the release of the Living Thelema book.
Hmm.
And I'm right on the cusp of starting to put those together into a second volume of Living Thelema. So it'll be, Living Thelema 2, essentially, with a whole bunch of new stuff. And that'll include, like, for example, the 4 episodes I did recently on Kabbalistic psychology and a
Hmm.
bunch of other stuff. We're about to have we recently put out a Portuguese translation of Living Thelema, and we're about to put out a Spanish translation.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
and then, I've always got ideas hatching for other kinds of books that I don't want to. I don't want to diffuse the energy by talking about it too much. But
Yeah.
Living Thelema 2 will be probably the next thing you see come out under my name, other than translations of the first one.
Okay. Yeah, I did pick up a copy of the complete book of ceremonial magic. That was really good. It was a great, felt like it was a really great survey of all the different sort of I guess you would say streams, because it
Hmm.
goes into sort of like Goetia and that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
and it's pretty much like the experts and people who have been
Yeah,
working like their whole life. You had like Stephen Skinner and Aaron Leach and a bunch of different
Cicero's.
authors.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, the Ciceros. So what was the inspiration behind getting that together? I think that was almost like, it felt like something that needed to be done, but was there something that kind of
Yeah.
spurred you to make that? I mean, it was really good.
Well, I got to credit Lon
Mhm.
Duquette
Mhm.
and the great folks at Llewellyn for first sort of hatching the idea and determining that it was going to happen. And then Lon asked
Mhm.
me to come on board as co-editor a few years ago. The project took a few years to get it done for various reasons, but
Mhm.
um, so in terms of the idea, the seed idea, and implanting that in my head. That was Llewellyn and Lon. But
Mhm.
it was, like I said, it was hard work, but a lot of fun and very gratifying to have that product, because I can see, and I'm saying this because of the quality of the other authors, not because of anything I did, but I can see that book really being a reference for many years or decades to come, and I'm really proud of that.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think that someone who's also just getting into ceremonial magic and the Western esoteric tradition in general, it's a really good survey to kind of, it gives you a really good sample of each of these different areas that you can explore for pretty much a lifetime, as most of those authors really have, right? Like, it's cool because after you read the whole thing, you get a little bit of an idea about, these different streams you can go off into. And so I definitely recommend that to people who sort of want a vast survey. And then also what's cool about it is you get to learn a little bit about each of the author, and you can kind of explore their work later on if you feel called to one of the traditions like the Golden Dawn or Enochian or like Goetian, other things that are in the book. So definitely a really good one to check out. Okay,
Excellent.
yeah, definitely. How can people, you know, reach out to you, or what sort of resources of yours would you like to tell the listeners about?
Okay, great. Um, so, of course, the podcast Living Thelema comes out as I have material. At this point, it's every 2 or 3 months, I would say, and so that's you can find that on YouTube. You can also subscribe to that like any other podcast. There's a dedicated YouTube channel for Living Thelema.
Mhm.
Um, then for my work in the Temple of the Silver Star, the website there is totss.org.
Mhm.
And so if you're interested in initiatory or more solitary, self-paced, learn at home kind of approaches, that's a great place to get the foundational training that can really set you up for a lot of success later.
Mhm.
Those interested in AA can go to onestarinsight.org
Mhm.
and get information there. And I forgot to mention with regard to Living Thelema that that my website has all the podcast episodes archived and ready for streaming or download, along with certain episodes that have other resources, reading materials, or instructional videos, and that's livingthelema.com.
Mhm. Okay.
So that's what
The
I'd say.
Okay, great. And the just out of curiosity, the initiatory order. So the difference between the academic track and the initiatory order is, I would imagine in the initiatory order, you work through a lot of the material of the academic track, but you guys, it's also sort of like a GD style, like group initiations
Right.
and rituals. It's pretty much, I think you mentioned it's based on the Golden Dawn, or is it,
hmm
are there like major differences? As you mentioned, sort of adapted to a Thelemic approach.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's based on it's a tree of life based degree structure, like the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Um, but everything in the order is aimed at putting aspirants in touch with their true will and helping them live that out. So, uh, it's really reconfigured for the Thelemic era. And Another thing that's really important to understand about Temple of the Silver Star is that this is not a reconstructed Golden Dawn type order. At no point we are lineal successors in an unbroken line from the original Golden Dawn. At no point did the line sort of peter out, and then 20 years later somebody picked up Rigardi's book and said, "Hey, let's start a Golden Dawn order."
Mhm.
This has been a living tradition of initiates meeting regularly and continuity of administrative structure and institutional memory going back 120 years or more now. And so when you pair that with the last century of insights from depth psychology, with modern science, with the influx of the Thelema current and all that brings, it's a really, I think it's a lovely initiatory journey for people. So if you're looking for foundational training and an initiatory context, I would really recommend the initiatory track of Temple of the Silver Star. But yeah, those who are looking for studying at home with one assigned instructor and maybe doing some online classes and such, but not the initiatory part, would probably benefit from the academic track.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's too bad. I think I mentioned this to you on Facebook, but I'm actually from Sacramento, and I know a lot of your you guys are kind of sort of based out of there. Is that right? Like the majority of your is that sort of the headquarters of the Temple of the Silver Star, or is it just one of the main campuses?
It had been the headquarters for a long time until I moved to North Carolina last year. But yeah, Sacramento was our home base from 2008 to 2020. And there's still it's a substantial temple presence there. One of our primary working groups is there, but we are all around the country and over in the UK, and starting to have some presence in other European countries as well. And so it's growing and it's exciting, and I'm loving meeting all the people that are getting interested in coming in.
Oh, definitely. Okay, thanks for coming on today, and I'll include links to your books and your podcasts in the show notes. And really appreciate spending the time to join this little podcast here. So until next time.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.